1 second.
All right. Hey, guys. Welcome back to another week of the Two Guys on Politics podcast. I'm producer Brian Broeking.
Welcome, my fellow Americans. I'm Bill Lipinski, and this is News, Views, and Comments.
And I want to welcome all the Arabs that are listening to this program, my fellow Arabs. Of course, I'm just joking, but in a way, not really, because I think all the listeners from my side are all Arabs wondering, what the heck is he doing? But we got a good topic today, right, Brian? The elections, the Illinois and national elections. We didn't want to be restricted to just one Democratic outcome of one of the 50 states, and what some of the challenges are having. Bill, you're our biggest, most veteran politician. What's the election?
Statesman, please.
And statesman,
Yes.
Diplomat and statesman. What's the biggest election challenge you think in the country this election or in Illinois?
A Republican winning statewide in Illinois. That's probably the biggest challenge that I can think of, to be perfectly honest with you. But to move off of Illinois, because maybe the Republican candidate for Secretary of State, he might possibly have a shot, but I don't know of any other statewide candidate. I asked a fellow this morning who's a Rockwood Republican to name for me the candidates that are running statewide in Illinois for the Republicans. The only one he could name was the guy running for governor. In the first time in his lifetime, he's not voting for a Republican for governor. So the Republican Party has continued to be nothing in the state of Illinois, unfortunately. But moving on to the national scale, I think things are once again getting quite interesting. I think the emotional lift that the Democrats got from the Supreme Court decision on Roe v. Wade is starting to subside. And I think the Republicans have regained their footing, and they're campaigning much more now on the economy, inflation, and crime. Now that's the way I see it. Who wants to go next? Ray, Brian?
Well, I definitely agree with that. I think over the past, couple months, and certainly through the summer, what we saw in a lot of the polling and a lot of the topics being discussed on a national level were all 2020 political campaign, ideas. There was Roe v. Wade, which still goes back to Trump because Trump appointed those Supreme Court justices that overturned it. It was the January 6 riots. That's a Trump issue. So a lot of that feeling was still going back to 2020. But as those topics become less and less immediate in the minds of Americans, and we get more economic bad news, we have a chance for a Republican governor and Ron DeSantis to have a great response to this hurricane and kind of build back better with that. I think the conversation has begun shifting to a president who's frankly still very, very unfavorable. He's still 42% in the favorability ratings. And at the end of the day, midterm elections are usually about, do you like the president? And this time we frankly do not.
Yeah, I think, nationally, President Biden is a weak leader for the Democratic Party. But obviously he's not up. It's just these different states. But from the standpoint of Illinois, I think the big issue still is crime. And I don't really hear the Democrats talking about crime. The only thing I hear about Democrats and crime is that they're letting the criminals out. Kim Foxx, Lori Lightfoot. When you look at some of these big Democrats, they're the ones that are pushing for reforms, for criminals. They want to make it easy. It sounds like they're more concerned about how to make life easier for the criminals than they are about making life safer for law-abiding citizens. And I don't know. I just talked to people who are Democrats, maybe middle of the road Democrats. Reagan Democrats, Democrats who are more conservative. They're not happy with the Democratic Party at all. It seems, and that's anecdotal. I've not done a study, but they're all talking about how the Democrats are not talking about crime, and all they talk about is abortion. And in Illinois, I don't care what anybody does in the rest of the country. We're going to have abortion in Illinois, whether we like it or not. It's here because the Democrats do control the state.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. And specifically, it's interesting that this safety bill that we've talked about doesn't actually go into effect until next year. So I
Right.
think it's actually very hard for Republicans to campaign on this because we haven't really seen any negative results from this. Yes, crime rates are, rising throughout the city. We're seeing things, and CEOs of big companies are either leaving or calling out Lori Lightfoot about this crime. But I don't think there's been a spark moment that Republicans in a state that they simply don't have any real structure behind them. There hasn't been a spark moment to kind of organize them behind that and push forward a candidate.
Well,
Yeah,
other than, go ahead, Bill.
I agree with that. I was just going to say I agree with that. But getting back to the national level, once again, 6-7 months ago, before Roe v. Wade, a lot of people were saying that the Republicans would capture the Senate, by 2-3 seats. Some people were predicting that the Republicans would capture the House by 30-40 seats. Then the Roe decision came along, and there was a great emotional lift for the Democrats. But as I say, I believe that is subsiding. I heard Karl Rove on Sunday morning talk show saying that he still felt that the Senate now was a toss-up because the issues have gotten back on crime and inflation and the general economy and people disliking Joe Biden. And he was saying, he felt that the House of Representatives would probably wind up being about 225 Republicans, so the Republicans would capture the House. I frankly believe that could easily go to 230 in favor of the Republicans. I still question that the Republicans can capture the Senate, primarily because of some of the candidates that were backed by Trump are really very poor candidates. They have a lot of problems, such as Herschel Walker in their background. And some of them have just made a lot of, very radical remarks during the course of this campaign. So I think the Democrats will probably capture the Senate, but the Republicans will capture the House. Now, as far as Illinois goes, as I've said before, I just don't see any races in Illinois. It's a terrible tragedy. I can remember this state elected a lot of Republicans statewide. I can remember many Republican governors. And I asked the question, what has happened? Well, what has happened? A lot of people out of Chicago and Cook County have moved into DuPage, have moved into Lake County. And that has started, to turn those counties more and more Democratic. And they start losing those counties. All the Republicans are going to have left is what is south of Springfield. That's still pretty much, except for pockets like a brown area in Illinois, that are still very Democratic. Most of Southern Illinois now is rock rib Republican. That's the way I see the situation.
Yeah, I just on Brian's comment, one of the things that I think Republicans are arguing, and I used to be, when I was a kid, I was a Republican. As I got older, I became a Democrat, and now I'm more independent. I will vote for the candidate I think is best, not necessarily I'm not committed to the Republican or Democratic parties anymore. But one of the things Brian mentioned was that this law, this Safety Act law in Illinois, doesn't start until January. They're making the point that Pritzker introduced it in January 2021 and specifically stated, let's not let it start until after the election on January 2023. That sounds very suspicious to people. And with these rumors going around and, all those fake newspapers out there, I mean, what's a fake newspaper? A newspaper that doesn't have an identity, but sometimes I read the Chicago Tribune and it sounds like a fake newspaper to me. I watch Jimmy Kimmel or CNN or some of these TV programs. They sound like fake news to me. It's really confusing out there. And I think it all comes down to, do you feel safe enough to go to Chicago, and is Chicago crime spilling over into Cook County? And the only reason I focus on Cook County and the 6-county region is that's where the Democratic base is. And if they lose votes there, the Democrats are going to lose influence in Illinois. I don't think they'll lose the state, but I think that they may have a problem. But Bill, you're absolutely right about I can name only one candidate. That's Dan Brady for Secretary of State.
Well,
That's it.
the only one I think
Darren,
has a chance. Excuse me, go ahead.
yeah, and then Dan and Darren Bailey, who's running for governor. Those are the only two that I know. And then there are a couple goofs, running in Cook County that I don't think have any, chance of doing anything. They're in a suicide, race there.
There's a woman, Salvi, running for the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
And, her husband was very involved in Republican politics for a number of years. She was a pretty successful candidate. I'm surprised that she has not been able to get more money and get her message out, because I think that race, could have been highlighted a lot by the media if she had money, to start doing some commercials. And, that her opponent really is nothing more, unfortunately, than a clone of Dick Durbin. So the state of Illinois really has two Dick Durbins, because he handpicked her. She never really says much on her own. She usually just agrees with Dick. But Salvi apparently has no money, because I don't see any kind of campaign that she's putting on whatsoever.
Yeah, the Republicans don't seem to have any money in Illinois. I haven't seen anything. And I blame the Republicans. To me, I don't understand, why they can't organize around some strong issues like crime. There are some individual Republicans, and some of them I don't like, who have really captured this issue and are really making waves, like in the 6th district, where this Republican mayor of Orland Park, Keith Pekow, is trying to unseat Sean Casten, the Democrat. And I think Casten is in trouble. And that's frightening to me, because Keith is so extreme. But all he talks about is crime. That's his whole message. And it seems to resonate, at least in that district. And I wonder, what is Casten doing? Talking about abortion. I don't know. Is abortion in jeopardy in Illinois? Am I wrong? Is it?
I can't possibly see it being challenged in this state. It's simply there isn't the desire to do it. Plus, on a national level, the Democrats aren't going to have the votes to codify it in the House in a couple weeks anyway, so it won't matter. At the end of the day, crime does seem like the big issue, but I think crime falls under, a similar problem that the Republican Party has had in different topics of what is the anti-crime, idea. What are they fighting for? What laws do they want to pass? I think it was safety passed because it was very easy to define what they're doing. We're reducing bail. We're allowing people to go out on bail for nonviolent crimes for the most part. So the question is, what is the opposite side? What are the, civil-minded Republicans saying about crime that is realistic to be implemented?
Well, for example, that cash bail is a great topic on crime, because it's true. It says that, because I had to read through it, it's 800 pages long, and to find this was very difficult. It basically says a judge is going to decide not just minor crimes, but felonies, rape, murder. It's up to the judge to decide if a man charged with murder is going to get cash bail or not. And that I don't trust the judges. I don't want the judges to make that decision. I don't trust them in Cook County. So
I don't
that
think
means
the judges want to make those decisions either, though.
No, but they
I think
do.
a lot of judges have said, though, they don't want the onus to be on them to decide those things. That's a scary thing to be constantly deciding. Of basically, there is no, general procedure for anything. It's just completely up in the air. That's no law. That's no order. That's simply chaos.
I think there were two judges that put out a release this week. The chief judge of the Cook County Circuit Court, who ran for mayor against after Harold Washington died, and I'm sorry, it used to be a 4th Ward alderman. What was his name?
Evans.
Tim Evans. I think he was saying, "Don't blame me and hold me responsible for that." But the point is that there are judges who pander to their constituency in Cook County. And if it's a minority constituency with a lot of people who are charged with crimes, they're going to tend to lean in favor of those that constituency. So I'm worried that, yeah, a person who's charged with rape or murder could be let out without having to post any bond. And that concerns me. It used to be that a judge really, everybody was required to put up cash bail, but a judge had the discretion to say, oh, you don't have the money, it's a minor crime, you don't have to do it. That's the proper way to do it, but they reversed it. Now no one is required to have cash bail, and it's up to the judge to decide who gets it. That seems like a backward way to fight criminals. Sounds like it's going to be a mess, though.
I think that safety bill could be a vehicle that would really help the Republicans very much in the state of Illinois. But once again, how many people know about that safety bill? The three of us here know about it because we're interested, we're involved. But how many average people know anything about it? And one of the reasons they don't know much about it is because the news media, for the most part, is in favor of that legislation because most members of the news media favor the Democrats. And the Republicans have an issue that could be very helpful to them, but they're not putting any ads up about that whatsoever. There were some newspaper articles about it, and as soon as those, not articles, but newspapers, as soon as that got out, boy, the Democrats poured money in to knock those down as much as possible. But I have not seen one ad on cable television or network television that talks about the safety bill. And there was a bill similar to this passed in New York State a couple of years ago. They had to amend it extensively because once it started to be implemented, it was a disaster.
There was one commercial, a Republican commercial, that showed a woman who was walking down a sidewalk that was attacked by four men. And she was beaten, she was attacked, she was robbed. And the TV stations, Governor Pritzker complained about it because they think Darren Bailey's campaign or a PAC associated with him put it up. And Pritzker complained to the TV stations where, coincidentally, he's been investing something like $100 million for advertising, and Bailey's paying nothing for advertising except very minimal. He complained that it was unfair, so they took that ad off the TV, even though that video was being played by the news media. So it just, I think the voters are smart, and I don't know if they could beat Pritzker, but I think that despite Darren Bailey's shortcomings, his lack of name recognition, his lack of experience in politics, the confusion that Pritzker's caused about things that he said, I think he has a shot at causing Pritzker to lose. I'm not convinced he could do it, but I think he's closer than anybody could be.
Do you believe in the tooth fairy too, Ray?
Well, I mean, listen, in Illinois, it's hard to believe anybody can beat a Democrat, but we did see it happen. We saw Republicans. You know, there was Judy Bar Topinka. There was a couple states attorneys. You know, was it Bernie Carey became?
There were governors not long ago. Yeah, there was a state's attorney by the name of Bernie Carey.
But I think we're missing a core piece to what made those things happen, which is the national level money cannot go into Illinois because there's too many real coin flip races in Georgia, Wisconsin, different purple states that the Republicans need to win before they need to win a blue state. So there's going to be no external money, no dark money that's coming into this election on the Republican side like it usually does. So that's kind of the missing X factor that I just don't think will push him over the edge this election.
So if you don't have the money, you don't have the news media with you, what chance do you have of winning any statewide election in this state? As I say, the guy running for Secretary of State, he's getting around. He's on every radio program I listen to. He shows up on TV, so he's really working very hard at it. But even if he wins, it's going to be an upset. But let's switch the focus from the state of Illinois, where there's really very little competition, and nationally. What do you think is going to happen, Ray, nationally?
Well, I think that I believe that the Republicans are going to take the House, and just based on what I've seen, it looks like the Republicans have a chance to take the Senate. It's possible that they won't, but even if they take the Senate, all that means is we're going to be in lockdown for another 2 years because Biden could veto anything. And even if they take the House, I'm not sure they have enough votes to override a veto by him. That would be a lot of votes, right? How many votes would you need to override a veto? 2/3?
Two-thirds.
Which would be a lot of Democrats would have to join those, at least some Democrats, right?
Well, a lot of Democrats that have to join, and that's not going to happen.
Yeah, so we're just going to be in total turmoil for another 2 years. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is watching us, wondering what the heck is happening to the United States. It just it's frightening. But the only good thing that I saw this whole week was that Biden and DeSantis in Florida had a nice conversation. They were talking past each other, though, to help the people of Florida, those rich, wealthy people who have those oceanfront properties that were destroyed. I don't know why we have to pay for their property damage. Let them go buy insurance and take care of themselves, right? Don't they have enough money? Those properties are 2-3 million.
You can't insure that. The insurance companies will not insure. It's too big of a risk. Brian,
Is that my problem? Is that my problem as a taxpayer that I got to pay for their problem?
On that topic, that goes back to Bush's handling of Katrina, and he didn't do, enough. So any president is going to throw federal funds at it, just because that's what we do as a country now. We throw federal funds at any issue we have. But on the topic of kind of the upcoming election, I think I've seen polls where the Democrats are losing by 3 points on the national level, or they're up 3 points, depending. I think one thing people stopped talking about is how much the Senate favors rural white voters, just the way the country is set up, right? Currently, the House is population based, right? And the way we can gerrymander in these states, it just depends on who holds office in those states, but generally that favors the Democrats. And then the Republicans are favored in the Senate. So realistically, we're in this strange scenario where it's actually the Republican candidate quality in the Senate that's hurting them more than the layout of the national landscape, right? So we have this kind of idea now from the past couple elections that there's this anti-Republican bias in these polls, right? A lot of polls will say we'll overrepresent the Democrats versus the Republicans, through and through. And that's actually not necessarily the case. If you look back, 10, 20 years, this is more of a recency bias from our end. And it's something that's been confounded by the fact that right now the response rates on telephone polls are 6%. This is down over 30% from 1990 and has continued to fall every year since. So it's very, very hard to get good informational data on the topic of who wins where. So to me, at the end of the day, I really think the Republicans will actually probably overperform in the Senate compared to what people think. And they'll probably underperform in the House. I think they probably end up with 123 or 223, 224 in the House. And then I bet they actually take a seat and end up 51-49 in the Senate.
What seat is that they're going to take in the Senate?
I think they end up flipping Georgia.
You think so?
Yeah.
Oh, I think they're going to flip Nevada. I think Laxalt is going to win Nevada and flip that one.
That's another good option. I think there's a lot of them that are very close that I think people underrate how high likelihood they are to flip.
Raymond?
I can only look at the campaign commercials, and that tells me what the big issues are. And I only hear two issues: abortion and crime. I don't hear people talking about any other issues. I hear a little bit about the economy. I don't hear anything about infrastructure. There's a little bit about climate change, especially now with Florida. They're talking about how they've never had so many hurricanes, which I don't agree with. I don't think Florida is an example of climate change impacting that. I just think we've had some bad hurricanes. But those are the issues that I see. And it tends to be the Democrats pushing abortion and the Republicans pushing crime. And I think when it really comes down to it, if people make a choice, I think even women are going to choose crime over abortion.
Well, the Republicans also have inflation. I personally believe inflation is more important than any other issue as far as influencing people to vote. I mean, I'm one that goes to the store. If I need something, I buy it. I never look at the price. The other day, I was coming out and I thought to myself, oh, I still got the receipt. I want to see how much these 7 items cost me. $62.50. I was absolutely shocked. And I think the more people who are living, more from paycheck to paycheck, inflation is going to be the number one item on their mind when they go to vote. And I believe that's why, even though Joe Biden has accomplished a number of things legislatively, he is still so unpopular in this country. I mean, what is he at, about 6%?
Well, don't you think that inflation is his problem, that he owns it? I mean, the way he's giving away money, the way you give away money and you tax people, I've seen, I agree with you. I go to the store, it's like everything is almost double the cost. It's not just gasoline that everybody focuses on. It's milk, it's meat, it's everything. But I blame this giveaway of money. They're giving away money, and instead of going back to work, a lot of people are just taking what they can get without working and enjoying that level of life. And I think there's something wrong with that. And I blame Biden for that. I'm not sure, whether, I don't believe Donald Trump is a good candidate. And I'm just not sure who the Republicans are going to put up. But even if Biden doesn't run for re-election, I don't know who's going to represent the Democratic Party. I'd like to see a guy like Manchin step up to the plate and say that he wants to do something. I'd even like a guy like DeSantis, who's controversial among Democrats, but seems like a smart guy, to step up and say, we need to do something.
Have you noticed that the news media in the last 2 or 3 days are starting to talk about DeSantis and saying, maybe he should have made mandatory evacuation, earlier in Florida. That really has nothing to do with Florida. That is to try to persuade
make him
people.
Look bad.
Exactly.
Yeah,
which is the big reason for that. At the end of the day, is because people are scared that, while this hurricane is bad and there are people who lost their lives, the best Ron DeSantis is executing on a certain goal. And what is that goal? Recovering the state of Florida over the next year and a half. This is a perfect opportunity for him to make Florida whole and then run that national wave onto the national stage.
At some point, Biden isn't going to give him the money to do that if he sees that that's what DeSantis is trying to do. He won't want him to.
He has to, because he's going to be demonized otherwise, the same way George W. Bush was.
But Florida's
he has to give the money.
Florida's pretty much a Republican, state, isn't it?
I mean, it is
pretty much.
But you can't. The problem is, even if it is a Republican state, you can still make the argument. I mean, Louisiana is also a Republican state. You had that same argument for a Republican president. Presidents have to support natural disasters because, for one, it helps the storyline on the Democratic side of worsening natural disasters due to climate change. So they have to support this. They have to support change here because it's one of their talking points as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with Bill that inflation is a big topic. And I do hear some of that stuff. I'm just not sure that maybe I'm just listening to the echo chamber in Illinois. I don't hear that inflation discussion. I don't think the Democrats here want to talk about inflation because they're fueling the inflation. Nationally, I wonder what it's like in other states, but I only see some of the national ads, when you go to some of these national programs. And I do think the media is biased. They're going to undermine somebody that they think is too conservative. They'll do everything they can to stop that person. And the conservative media, I'm not sure what their game plan is, but they're not doing a good job of representing their side. So it's really, it's going to be an interesting thing on November 8th to see what happens.
I think what you have to do is sort of divorce yourself from Illinois in what is happening or isn't happening in Illinois. Because as we all agreed earlier, the Democrats more than likely are going to sweep all the statewide offices. They may
Right.
even pick up a congressional seat here or there. So, Illinois is not mainstream America anymore. It is solidly in the liberal Democratic camp. So forget what's going on in here and pick some states that you know of that are much more middle of the road to see what's going on in those areas. I mean, a state like Ohio or a state like Pennsylvania, both of those, I think, are fairly even states, Democrat and Republican. Those are the kind of places you should look at to get an idea of what you think is going to happen nationally.
I know physically I'm in Illinois, but mentally I keep thinking I want to be in Arizona or I want to be in Nevada, where the taxes are lower, where I'm not going to get held up when I go to the bank or the grocery store. I talk to people out there, things are still better in those Republican states than they are in this Democratic state. And I don't know, I have not been to Chicago now in a year. And I've told my son, my dad graduated from DePaul, my daughter graduated from DePaul. I'm not going to let him go to DePaul. I don't trust the safety factor there. It's a great school, but I don't want to put my son in Chicago. I'm going to have him go someplace else.
I think that's a wise move on your part.
I think so myself too. All right, what else? Anything else about this? We're only a few weeks away. It's about 1 month, right? About a little more than 4 weeks. So it'll be interesting to see what happens about that.
If we have some time left, I'd like you and Brian, if you have an opinion on, why is Joe Biden still so negative in polls, even though he had a number of legislative victories. Most people give him credit for handling the situation in the Ukraine very well, but he is still, best he does is about 46%. What do you say on that?
From my viewpoint, I think it's mostly because the legislative victories he has gotten have been mostly meaningless. We talk about this infrastructure bill as being this massive spending, which it is in the in like a small scale. But what you have to remember is that spending is over 10 years. So when you really divide it up, it's really only $100 billion each year, which may sound like a lot. But at the end of the day, the return that we're going to get for that is like a couple highways throughout America or a couple new bridges, right? The overall change in the American infrastructure landscape isn't going to be nearly enough with that bill. So between that, the fact that even Democrats can kind of accept that Joe Biden's losing it a little bit. You look at him, he's clearly not all there. You don't want to support a guy like that, right? Even if he, has the right idea, he doesn't seem all there. He doesn't seem with it. I don't want to support a guy like that. And I think a lot of people who even like his legislative victories wouldn't want to support that. So I think it kind of all goes down to this interesting question of, Joe Biden's only like 42 to 46% approval rating. But how much of that actually matters on the downstream ballot this time around versus others? I think there's almost never been a less important top Democrat than there is now with Joe Biden, because I think a lot of people can look past that, see the policies he projects on, and maybe the Democrats overperform because of that.
It's hard to have confidence in President Biden when you see him make all these faux pas, talking about a dead congresswoman, wondering where she's at a speech that he gives, in a state where everybody is 30 days, celebrating, or commemorating her passing. He's made so many gaffes that it's not just Gerald Ford getting hit by a golf ball, or somebody's tripping all the time. This is a guy who's who's in charge. We're in the middle of a war with Russia and Ukraine. And I get this feeling that, is he capable? So he's a scripted president. And that's more fearsome to me than anything, because the people around him clearly are calling the shots. And they weren't elected by me. These are Democratic, consultants and activists and influencers who are deciding where we're going to go, not the person who was elected or who I voted for, 2 years ago. That's a big concern to me. And the question of what's going to happen in 2 years, I just don't see any strong candidates. Trump and Biden again, oh my God, that's just 4 more years of misery no matter who wins. So it's going to be very frightening, and it is a frightening time, and it's an expensive, frightening time where I'm worried about leaving the house. That's not a good situation.
I'm glad you're so upbeat about things. Not that you're wrong. No, I think you stated it very well, but I'd like to see a little bit more, optimism pertaining to our country. It's still the greatest country in the world. People are still standing in line to get in, and they're still sneaking in as quickly as possible. Of course, with Joe as president, they don't really have to sneak in. They just get up there to the river and walk across, and we arrest them. We give them a hearing, we give them a work permit. We say, see you in 6 months, come back, we'll let you know if you can stay.
Yeah, that's another issue that, migrants, we have the issue of immigrants, asylum seekers, and migrants. Migrants are people who come in, they work the fields, and then they go back. These are migrants who want to stay here. They don't want to go back, and we're going to give them money. They're not working the fields anymore. They're not working these farmlands or these ranches. These are people that are coming here and they're taking money from us. And if you're going to seek asylum, there's a process you have to go through. And we've totally lost control of the borders. That's another disconcerting, issue, for me, that we don't have control of our borders. Are you kidding me? This is really troublesome.
I think that's one of the worst things the Biden administration has done, is to lose control of the border to the extent that they have. There is no control of that border whatsoever. And I think that's a terrible disservice to American citizens.
It makes it really tough because you look at a lot of Democrats look at the social policies of the Nordic countries in Europe and say, oh, we want to emulate these, but seem to forget that the Nordic countries also have basically zero immigration. They let basically no one new in. That there is no illegal immigration. They get deported immediately from those countries, and that's why they're able to offer those services to their citizens, because they are their citizens and they know who they are. I think that's a clear disconnect. That is something the Republicans should definitely push on and show the idea that if you want.
What happened?
Yeah, I hear you, Bill, but I lost Brian. Can you hear us, Brian? Well, I think this is a good time. We should just end it right here.
We may. Well, yes.
All right. So, Brian, I'm going to say that was Brian Broeking, our producer, a great guy and contributor to the show. I'm Ray Hanania.
And I'm Bill Lipinski. And until next time, I'm a fellow American.